What if the greatest empire was not built on swords or gold, but on the minds of the masses? Throughout history, rulers, tyrants, and even modern leaders have all discovered the same truth. The crowd is not logical. It is emotional. A single individual may reason, but when merged into a collective, people surrender their judgment and move as one body easily ignited by fear, symbols, or a promise of security. This is why those who master the psychology of the crowd can command nations without lifting a blade. The true battlefield is not outside it, is inside the human mind. But here lies the darker question. If a crowd can be controlled so easily, then how much of your free will is really yours? Why does a crowd behave so differently from an individual? A single person can pause, reflect, and weigh consequences. But when fused into a group, that same person often surrenders reason to emotion. The crowd does not think, it feels. It does not analyze, it reacts. And because it reacts in unison, the energy of one is multiplied into the frenzy of thousands. This is the paradox every ruler in history has understood. One individual may resist you, but the crowd, once ignited, will obey without hesitation. Gustave Le Bon, in his classic work, The Crowd, described it as the psychological transformation that occurs when individuals are absorbed into the collective. In this state, their sense of responsibility vanishes, and what remains is raw emotion, anger, ecstasy, fear, or blind loyalty. Leaders who know how to channel these emotions hold a weapon more powerful than any army. Consider ancient Rome. The emperors built the Colosseum not simply to entertain, but to control. Bread and circuses, food for the stomach, spectacle for the eyes. As the masses roared at the sight of blood, they forgot their hunger for justice, their grievances with power, and their sense of individuality. The crowd became predictable, pliable, and easily directed. Do you see the brilliance? By controlling the emotional rhythm of the masses, the emperor neutralized dissent without needing to silence a single voice. Fast forward centuries, and the pattern remains the same. From the fiery sermons of medieval preachers to the rousing speeches of modern politicians, the formula does not change. Ignite emotion, repeat a simple idea, and let the crowd carry itself forward. Once inside the collective mind, even the most skeptical individual may find themselves swept into chants they never believed in, decisions they never questioned, and actions they would never commit alone. But here's the hidden danger. Once a crowd is set in motion, it develops its own will. It can exalt a leader one day and tear him apart the next. History is littered with rulers who believed they controlled the crowd only to be consumed by it. Think of Louis XVI, who underestimated the rage of the French masses, or Ceausescu in Romania, whose loyal crowd turned into his executioners within hours. The crowd is a beast, but one that can devour its master if not handled with precision. This is why true strategists treat the crowd like fire, dangerous but invaluable when controlled. They never appeal to reason, for reason does not move the masses. They speak in symbols, emotions, and absolutes. They create a sense of unity, an us versus them, because nothing strengthens a crowd more than a common enemy. And above all, they understand timing. One wrong move and the crowd disperses. One right spark and it becomes unstoppable. Now ask yourself, when you cheer in a stadium, follow trends online, or join a movement, are you thinking independently, or are you just another echo in the collective voice? The unsettling truth is this: once inside the crowd, even the strongest minds risk becoming instruments of someone else's design. The question then is not whether crowds can be controlled. They always can. The real question is how that control is maintained, and what subtle chains bind the mind without you ever noticing. And that leads us to the next layer of psychological strategy, the illusion of choice. What is the most effective way to control people? Not by chaining their hands, but by convincing them that the chains are freedom. The cleverest rulers and strategists understand this. A crowd does not rebel when it believes it has chosen its own path, even if that path was carefully designed in advance. This is the essence of the illusion of choice. Consider elections in democratic societies. Citizens proudly proclaim their right to choose, but the field of options is almost always narrowed, filtered, and framed by powers behind the curtain. You may choose between candidate A and candidate B, but both are products of the same system, funded by the same interests, constrained by the same institutions. To the masses, the ritual of voting feels like empowerment. In reality, it is often just the selection between two predetermined cages. Are you free if all the roads lead to the same destination? This tactic is not new. Ancient emperors mastered it long before modern politics. Roman generals would allow their soldiers to vote on battle plans, but every option presented led to the same course of action. The men felt ownership of the decision, yet the general had orchestrated it from the beginning. In feudal systems, peasants were granted choices in disputes, but all under the laws of the lord, ensuring the outcome never strayed from his interests. The brilliance of this strategy lies in its simplicity. People rarely resist what they believe they chose for themselves. Think about consumer culture today. You enter a supermarket with thousands of products, countless brands, endless packaging. It feels overwhelming, almost liberating. Yet behind the shiny logos, how many companies truly exist? A handful of corporations quietly own the majority of what you see. You are given the thrill of selection, while the profits funnel to the same sources. Choice becomes theater, an illusion that satisfies the mind while leaving the system untouched. Psychologists call this the paradox of choice. When presented with many options, people feel empowered, but also distracted. They rarely ask whether the structure of those options is itself a trap. The illusion of variety masks the deeper lack of freedom. Ask yourself, how often do you question the menu instead of simply ordering from it? The power of this illusion is magnified when fused with group psychology. A crowd that believes it has chosen will defend that choice with passion, even if it was manipulated from the start. Political partisans, sports fans, brand loyalists all cling fiercely to their side, forgetting that the system itself created the sides. And once people emotionally invest in their choice, they become blind to the fact that it was never truly theirs. History provides chilling examples. During World War II, propaganda machines didn't just dictate what to believe, they offered options within controlled narratives. Citizens could align with patriotic sacrifice, with national pride, or with loyalty to the leader. All paths led back to obedience. But because the people felt they had picked their stance, resistance dissolved. Control wrapped itself in the mask of freedom, and this principle extends to our daily lives. Algorithms feed us personalized choices, what to watch, what to buy, even who to date. Each suggestion feels tailored to us, but in truth, it is designed to guide us deeper into predictable patterns of behavior. We click, we choose, we indulge, believing ourselves free, while invisible systems steer us toward outcomes that serve their creators. Here is the disturbing truth: the illusion of choice is more dangerous than outright coercion. A dictator may command obedience through fear, but the illusion convinces you to obey willingly. Fear creates resentment, but illusion creates loyalty. Which is more effective for long-term control? So the next time you are given a decision, pause and ask, am I truly choosing? Or am I choosing between cages? Because once you begin to notice the cage, you start to see the deeper architecture of control. And that architecture is built not only on options, but on something far more primal: symbols, rituals, and emotion. If the illusion of choice builds the cage, then symbols and rituals paint its walls so beautifully that the crowd forgets it is trapped. Human beings are not guided by logic alone. We are creatures of meaning. And meaning is not delivered through long arguments, but through images, chants, and repeated actions that bypass reason and strike directly at the heart. Think about it. What moves people more, an economic policy document or a flag waving in the wind? 1,000 words of logic can be forgotten in seconds, but a single symbol can live in the mind for generations. Leaders who understand this use symbols as psychological shortcuts, compressing complex ideas into something visceral. A crown is not just metal, it is centuries of authority. A cross is not just wood, it is a spiritual anchor. A brand logo is not just a design, it is identity, aspiration, and emotion condensed into one. History is full of such manipulations. Consider the grand rallies of Nazi Germany. Hitler understood that logic would not capture the masses, emotion would. The swastika, the uniformity of soldiers marching in step, the chants repeated with military rhythm, these were not accidents. They were rituals designed to dissolve individuality and fuse the crowd into one collective body, united not by reason, but by emotion. People left those rallies not with new knowledge, but with an overwhelming sense of belonging and purpose. Do you see the genius? It was less about what he said, and more about what they felt. Religion offers another example. For centuries, churches have used rituals. Bells ringing incense, rising hymns sung together to create unity. Whether or not believers understood doctrine, they felt the sacred power of repetition and shared experience. A ritual does not ask you to think, it demands that you participate. And through participation, the crowd slowly becomes synchronized, like soldiers marching to the same drumbeat. Once synchronized, the crowd is easier to direct. Even in the modern world, symbols dominate our decisions. Corporate branding is nothing more than a secular religion. A logo on a shoe, a ritual around unboxing a product, a slogan repeated until it echoes in your mind. These are not random marketing tricks. They are psychological levers. When you see the Apple logo, you don't just see a company. You see innovation status and identity. When millions line up for a product launch, they aren't buying technology, they're participating in a ritual. Why does this work so powerfully? Because the human brain craves stories and symbols more than facts. Neuroscience shows that emotion drives memory and decision-making. You may forget what a politician promised, but you won't forget the symbol on the poster or the chant repeated in the rally. Logic makes you think. Emotion makes you act. And in the game of power, action is what matters. But here's the darker layer. Once a symbol is internalized, people defend it as if it were part of themselves. Attack a flag, and you're not just attacking fabric, you're attacking identity. This is why rulers and manipulators embed their power into symbols. It transforms obedience from something external into something personal. The crowd doesn't just follow, they protect the very image of their own submission. Look closely at today's world, and you will see the same strategies repeated. Social movements rally around hashtags, companies cultivate rituals around products, and nations ignite unity through parades and national anthems. Each is a performance designed to align emotion, silence dissent, and bind individuals into the collective. But here is the question you must ask yourself. When you stand in a crowd and chant, when you wear a symbol proudly, when you repeat a ritual, are you expressing freedom or are you surrendering it? Because while symbols and rituals can unite, they also entrap. And the masters of psychological strategy know that once the crowd is bound emotionally, the next step is to rewrite their reality entirely through narrative, the master key of control. If symbols ignite emotion, then narrative gives it direction. Without a story, symbols are just images and rituals are just motions. But once woven into a narrative, they become a force that can move entire nations. Narrative is the master key of control because it does not merely influence how people act, it reshapes how they see reality itself. Think of Napoleon. He was not merely a general who won battles. He was the child of destiny, the man chosen by fate to restore the glory of France. This was not an objective truth. It was a carefully constructed narrative. Through paintings, speeches, and myths spread across Europe, Napoleon transformed himself from a soldier into a legend. People followed not just his orders, but the story of who he was supposed to be. The brilliance of narrative lies in its subtlety. Facts can be challenged, but stories sink deeper. A crowd may argue with numbers, but how do you argue with destiny, justice, or the will of the people? Once a story grips the collective imagination, it becomes immune to logic. It doesn't matter if the narrative is false. If enough people believe it, it becomes reality. Modern politics thrives on this principle. Campaigns are not battles of policies, but battles of stories. One side claims to defend freedom, the other claims to protect justice. Both sides may promise similar things, but the narrative each constructs divides the crowd into opposing tribes. And once a person identifies with a story, they do not just support it, they become it. To attack the story is to attack their very identity. Propaganda machines understand this better than anyone. During the Cold War, both East and West framed themselves as defenders of humanity against the evil of the other. The narrative was simple, emotional, and all-encompassing. Citizens did not just live in countries, they lived inside a story that defined who they were and who they must oppose. And because stories operate at this deep psychological level, they silence doubt. Even atrocities can be justified if they are written as part of the greater good. But the power of narrative extends beyond politics. Corporations craft stories around their brands. Apple is not selling electronics. It is selling the narrative of innovation, rebellion, and creativity. Nike is not just shoes. It is a story of victory, struggle, and triumph over limits. Consumers are not simply buying products, they are buying identities written into stories. Why does this work so effectively? Because humans cannot endure chaos. We crave meaning. And when life is uncertain, the crowd clings to the story that explains their place in the world. Narrative gives order to confusion, purpose to suffering, and justification to obedience. It whispers, "You are part of something greater." And once that belief is planted, people will endure sacrifice, even die, because the story tells them it matters. But here lies the danger. If reality itself can be rewritten with words, then who controls the storyteller controls the world. This is why every regime, every empire, every corporation invests not just in power, but in narrative control. From history books to news broadcasts, from advertisements to social media feeds, the goal is the same: to frame the story so the crowd never questions the hand guiding it. And yet even the strongest story has a weakness. When fear enters the picture, narrative hardens into chains. The story does not just inspire, it imprisons. And this brings us to the most ruthless instrument of all fear and security, the final lever of control. All strategies of control eventually converge on one point: fear. Fear is the most primal, the most reliable, and the most enduring tool of power. Symbols can inspire, narratives can guide, But it is fear that keeps the crowd obedient when inspiration fades. People may doubt a leader's promises, but they rarely question their own survival. Machiavelli himself declared that it is safer for a ruler to be feared than loved. Love is fragile, easily betrayed, easily withdrawn. But fear burns into the mind. It shapes choices before they are even made. A crowd afraid of chaos, invasion, hunger, or punishment will cling to whoever promises protection, even if that same hand created the danger in the first place. History is full of leaders who mastered this lever. Consider Joseph Stalin. He did not merely command through ideology, he ruled through terror. Citizens never knew when suspicion might fall upon them. The knock at the door in the night became a symbol of fear so powerful that silence and obedience were the only rational responses. Stalin's genius, if we dare call it that, was that the people feared not only him, but each other. Fear fragmented the masses, ensuring they could never unite against him. But fear does not always need to be brutal. Sometimes it disguises itself as protection. Governments both ancient and modern have long exploited external threats, whether real or fabricated, to justify tighter control. During wartime, dissent becomes treason, and questioning authority becomes dangerous. Citizens terrified of the enemy outside willingly surrender freedoms to the authority within. Do you see the irony? The promise of security becomes the cage of obedience. Even in peaceful times, fear can be manufactured. Politicians exaggerate dangers, corporations warn of missing out, and media thrives on panic. Fear of poverty, fear of irrelevance, fear of being left behind, each one subtly guides the crowd into behaviors they might otherwise resist. And the more invisible the fear, the more powerful it becomes. A soldier may fight an enemy he can see, but how does one fight the fear of uncertainty or the fear of being alone? Notice also how fear pairs perfectly with security. Once fear is established, the solution is offered safety protection order. The crowd, desperate for relief, accepts restrictions that would once have seemed unbearable. After the September 11th attacks, entire populations submitted to mass surveillance and tighter controls, not because they loved authority, but because fear made them beg for it. The genius of this strategy lies in its cycle. Leaders create or amplify fear, then position themselves as the only source of safety. The crowd, too frightened to resist, becomes grateful to its jailer. And so fear becomes not just a weapon, but a contract. The people surrender freedom in exchange for the illusion of security. But here is the critical truth. Fear cannot be sustained forever. Push it too far, and the crowd may snap, turning its terror into rage. History has shown this again and again. The same masses who bow under fear can rise overnight when desperation overtakes obedience. The French Revolution, the fall of the Berlin Wall, the Arab Spring all remind us that fear has limits. A crowd controlled too tightly may one day choose death over submission. And so fear is both the peak of psychological control and its most dangerous gamble. It keeps power intact, but it also sows the seeds of its own destruction. Which brings us to the final question. What happens when control itself begins to break? Every empire, every ruler, every system of control eventually faces the same dilemma. What happens when the illusion shatters? For as powerful as psychological strategies are symbols, narratives, fear they all share one fatal weakness, the crowd itself. The same masses that kneel in obedience can, under the right conditions, rise with a fury no ruler can contain. Crowds may be emotional and pliable, but they are not infinitely submissive. Pressure, once too heavy, creates cracks. Fear, once unbearable, transforms into anger. And when that anger spreads through the collective, the same psychology that made the crowd obedient now makes it uncontrollable. Emotions spread like wildfire, and suddenly the beast once tamed becomes a storm that devours its master. History offers countless warnings. Think of Louis XVI in France. For years, the monarchy controlled the narrative, the king as God's chosen ruler, the nobility as the natural order, the peasants as dutiful subjects. But hunger, inequality, and despair eroded the illusion. Symbols of divine power lost their meaning when bread was scarce. Fear of authority collapsed when people realized they had nothing left to lose. The French Revolution was not just political, it was the moment control itself broke. Or consider Niccolò Ceausescu of Romania. For decades, he cultivated an image of invincible authority, with rallies choreographed to display loyalty. Yet in 1989, during one of these very rallies, the crowd that once chanted his name suddenly booed. Within days, the regime collapsed. What changed? The narrative no longer matched reality. Symbols felt hollow. Fear had stretched too far. And once the crowd broke free, no army, no propaganda, no illusion could save him. This is the danger every manipulator of crowds must face. Control is never absolute. It is a balancing act between pressure and release, between fear and hope. Push too little, and the crowd grows restless. Push too hard, and it rebels. The crowd may sleep under illusions for decades, but when it awakens, it does not forgive. Even in modern times, we see how fragile control can be. Movements spread faster than ever, igniting through digital platforms that bypass traditional narratives. A single spark, a video, a protest, a scandal can unravel decades of carefully maintained psychological strategy. Leaders who once seemed untouchable can fall overnight undone, not by armies, but by the same crowd they once commanded. The lesson is clear: control built on manipulation is never permanent. It can endure for years, even centuries, but it always carries within it the seeds of collapse. The crowd is unpredictable. It can be lulled, distracted, and frightened, but never truly owned. And when the balance breaks, it does not matter how powerful the symbols, how convincing the story, or how terrifying the fear. The masses will surge forward, and no one, no king, no tyrant, no empire can stop them. So the ultimate question remains: do you control the crowd, or are you only delaying the moment it turns on you? Because history has shown us one brutal truth: when the crowd is controlled, power reaches its peak. But when control breaks, it is the rulers who are devoured. From Rome's Colosseum to modern political campaigns, from religious rituals to corporate branding, the pattern is clear. The crowd is never guided by reason, but by emotion, illusion, and fear. Control is achieved not by chains of iron, but by chains of the mind, symbols that inspire narratives, that rewrite reality, and fear that compels obedience. But as history reminds us, no control lasts forever. The very strategies that keep the crowd docile can one day ignite its fury. A story loses its power, a symbol loses its meaning, and fear turns into rage. And when that moment comes, the same masses that once obeyed blindly will rise with unstoppable force, sweeping away everything in their path. The true peak of psychological strategy, then, is not simply to control the crowd. It is to maintain the delicate balance between obedience and collapse. Those who master it can rule for decades. Those who fail become victims of the very forces they once commanded. So the question remains: are you truly free in your choices, your beliefs, your emotions? Or are you already part of someone else's strategy? If you found these insights valuable, leave your thoughts below. Do you believe crowds can ever truly be free, or will they always be shaped by power? And don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned, because in the next video, we will uncover another hidden weapon of influence: the subtle tyranny of everyday persuasion.